Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, everybody. It could be good afternoon where you are. It's my pleasure to present Module 1 to you all. The Module 1, as you know, is on Introduction to the Nexus. I am Professor Babafemi A. Badejo, who is the director for the online training course, and my co-director is Dr. Gaston Gohu. As I said, Module 1 is on Introduction to the Nexus, understanding of the nexus among peace and security, development, human rights, and humanitarian dimensions. We will be looking at the conceptual issues involved in this effort. I already introduced the two of us, that is myself and the co-director. Ms. Dan Ensaya is the course tutor. All three of us will be interacting with you one way or the other throughout the training. The contents of this module includes background and justification for for the training, objectives of the course. There is also the objective of the module, then theory and the concept of the Nexus approach, sustainable development goals, unpacking each pillar. There are 4 pillars that we are focusing on, unpacking each one: development, peace and security, human rights, and humanitarianism. And then we will do some analytical framework, and during that analytical framework, clarify the concept of situational foundation, which I am introducing into looking at the quadruple nexus. And of course, we will have quiz and assessments, as well as some further readings. Well, on background and justification, it's important to note that the dual resolutions passed by the General Assembly and the Security Council in April 2016, resolutions 70/262 and S/2282 of 2016, recognized the imperatives of coherence and complementarity between the UN's peace and security efforts and its development, human rights, and humanitarian work. Joint commitments shared by the United Nations Secretary General and the African Union Commission Chairperson towards working together for the implementation of Agenda 2063 and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, with the recognition of the interlinkages between the pillars that I had mentioned earlier on. The lack of sufficient understanding and application in theory and policy of the Nexus approach makes the course so important. Proper application of the Nexus approach will not only foster an integrative operational approach, reduce situations of conflict and threats to good life, but also contribute meaningfully to the achievements of development goals embodied in Agenda 2063, which is guidance towards the Africa we want, and the Agenda 2030 on the SDGs. And final justification, there is need to promote knowledge and awareness on the interlinkages. The objectives of the course, therefore, would involve to strengthen the capacity of African policymakers to design and implement policies that promote the nexus between peace, security, human rights, humanitarian affairs, and development for an accelerated implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. Another objective will involve to promote synergistic, complementary, and integrated approaches in the implementation of interventions addressing the 4 pillars in order to contribute to effective and lasting solutions to conflicts, insecurities, and other threats to humanity in Africa for the furtherance of the SDGs. Theory and concept of the nexus. The term nexus derives from the Latin word nectere, meaning to bind, tie, or link together. This term has undergone so much evolution and transformation in meaning and application. It started with trying to build synergy between the humanitarian and developmental efforts, especially in a post-conflict situation. This progressed to the recognition of the importance of peace for the amelioration of humanitarian problems and realization of development. The triple nexus brings together its 3-pronged approach of peace, development, and humanitarian action, which today operationally appears in UN resolutions, strategy documents of governments and international organizations and NGOs, as well as around interventionist policy talks. OECD DAC definition, nexus approach refers to the aim of strengthening collaboration, coherence, and complementarity. The approach seeks to capitalize on the comparative advantages of each pillar to the extent of their relevance in this specific context. In order to reduce overall vulnerability and the number of unmet needs, strengthen risk management capacities, and address root causes of conflict. The 2016 World Humanitarian Summit enunciated the New Ways of Working, NWOW principles. In principle and practice, nexus theories seek a triple win of humanitarian aid that is developmentally applied in order to build peace. The nexus concept emphasizes the importance of understanding connections, synergies, and trade-offs. If well implemented, it could reduce negative surprises and promote integrated planning, management, and governance in the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. Nexus approach helps in uncovering synergies and co-benefits, detect and minimize harmful trade-offs, support in identifying unexpected consequences, bring together actors involved in different sectors. Nexus approaches can promote collaboration, cooperation, coordination, and policy coherence for effective governance and management. Very importantly in this course is the move from triple nexus to a quadruple nexus. That is peace/security, development, human rights, and humanitarian affairs. The purpose is to operate for the advancement of society on the basis of a quadruple nexus to achieve or even accelerate efforts towards the realization of Agendas 2030 and 2063. Of course, you all know that Agenda 2063 is the aspirational goals that the African Union put in place. It seeks to maximize the advantages of each pillar in order to reduce overall vulnerabilities and the number of unmet needs. We shall be adopting a quadruple interlinkages approach to accommodate the 4 pillars within the situational foundation issues that are necessary for an optimal operational state. Challenges of implementing the interlinkages approach. General additional resources cost. The fear that mixing humanitarian, peace, and development activities will politicize humanitarianism and negate humanitarian principles. Absence of a systematic implementation of this new way of working. Security funding is difficult because donors rarely fund multi-year projects that fit the nexus. Lack of alignment of plans. Absence of a common and agreed understanding of problems and, by extension, conceptualization. The lack of engagement of civil society. Sustainable Development Goals. The growing complexities of global challenges threatening the explosively increasing human population, poverty, poor access to healthcare and other critical needs, socio-political, economic, and environmental issues, including environmental conservation and climate change, necessitated the thinking for a set of visions called the Sustainable Development Goals. The 2030 Agenda embodies 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are integrated and mutually reinforcing. The Global Sustainable Development Agenda seeks to end poverty, protect the planet, ensure sustainable peace and prosperity by 2030. The 17 goals address issues pertinent to the 4 pillars of peace and security, development, human rights, and humanitarianism in Africa. The 2030 Agenda recognizes the need to build peaceful, just, inclusive societies that provide equal access to justice based on respect for human rights, effective rule of law, and good governance at all levels, and on transparent, effective, and accountable institutions. Success in driving the situational quadruple nexus approach takes us towards the maximization of the SDGs as shown in the illustrative diagram. The summation of all the SDGs is equal to the realization of optimal freedoms that are essential for a good, if not a perfect life on Earth, likeable to paradise on Earth, or a state of utmost freedom, as shown in the second diagram. Unpacking each pillar, development. Development seeks to provide a long-term support to developing countries to deliver sustainable solutions for addressing poverty, supporting livelihoods, and providing basic services with a particular focus on those in greatest need and furthest behind. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the 17 SDGs, the AU Agenda 2063, its aspirations and goals, the AU-UN development frameworks, the UNDP Human Development Reports, the framework for development of various subregions, the African Sustainable Development Report, the Next Frontier Human Development, and the Anthropocene are key instruments for evaluating the development pillar. Classical theories of development consider development within the framework of economic growth and development. Development most commonly is perceived as structural transformation, human development, development of democracy and governance, and development as environmental sustainability. The understanding of sustainable development continues to evolve with growing realization of the complexities of human activities and interactions with the environment. The popular World Commission on Environment and Development, the WCED 1987 report, Our Common Future, sees sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It later transcended to real income achievement and improvement of educational standard, access to health care, and overall quality of life. Subsequently, in the 1990s, as popularized by Harwood, sustainable development became about achieving the greatest benefits for humans and more efficient resources utilization in balance with the environment. Sustainable development later appealed more as a reconciliation of the economy and the environment on a new path of development for a sustainable development of mankind. Very critical is the fact that sustainable development must involve environmental sustainability. There is no peace without development. There is no development without peace, and there is no peace and development without human rights. The absence or deficiency in the pillars of peace and security, human rights, and development leads to humanitarian crises. Humanitarian interventions towards building resilience interlinks with development, averts tensions and conflicts, hence ensuring respect for human rights. Peace and security. Peace and security is by far one of the most used terms in international discourse. There could be negative or positive peace. Negative peace represents the absence of violence. Positive peace defines the set of attitudes, institutions, structures, which when strengthened will lead to a more peaceful society. Security, in the most rounded understanding, covers varying critical issues as individual security, collective/group security, national security, response to internal and external threats to security, social, political, economic, legal, judicial, food, financial, health, humanitarian, and environmental security. The conception of security as human security gives security a humanitarian and developmental dimension. Security also shares link with human rights as it relates with human rights core values like freedom and development. Security is about people and less of territory. Security is more of development and less of arms. This thinking brought a new paradigm of sustainable human development with peace dividend. Human security also involved freedom from fear and want on a number of aspects of human daily lives and living. In this respect, freedom from fear of hunger, poverty, diseases like COVID-19 and other viruses like Ebola, environmental degradation and accompanying crimes, terrorism, coupled with the state on violations of human rights, resilience in managing all forms of natural and man-made disasters, etc. Kofi Annan, former UN Secretary General and a son of Africa, considered the right to freedom from want, the right to freedom from fear, and the right of future generations to inherit a healthy planet as components of human security. Human security cannot be achieved without a combination of the rule of law, the respect for democracy, the protection of human rights, good governance, environmental protection, and peaceful resolution of conflicts. There is no development without peace, but there is also no peace without development. Inclusive and sustainable development not only is an end in itself, but also happens to be the best defense against the risk of violent conflict. Human rights are the core of international law and international relations, representing basic values common to all cultures to be respected by all countries. Human rights are thus inalienable fundamental rights which individuals are inherently entitled to simply because they are human beings. The United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, is the bedrock for all human rights frameworks and actions at all levels today. Despite the existence of international and regional frameworks for human rights and rule of law, there is widely reported human rights abuses or threats to human rights in Africa. The challenges posed by weakened or fragile states and institutions, corruption, disruption of the rule of law, impunity, intimidation, and repression of citizens are major drivers of human rights abuse in Africa. Abuses by security forces or state agencies impeded freedom of civil society organizations and the media. Issues around education and cultural rights, unlawful arbitrary killings, extrajudicial killings, forced disappearances, impeded religious and political freedoms, sexual and gender-based rights abuses, unlawful infringement on citizens' privacy rights, threats to rights of peaceful assembly. Humanitarianism. The core of humanitarianism is to save lives, alleviate sufferings, and maintain human dignity during and after man-made crises and disaster, including those caused by natural hazards, as well as to prevent and strengthen preparedness for when such situations occur. The UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, has continued to report climate crisis and displacements as two major humanitarian challenges. Natural disaster often results to situations of many people fleeing their homes and posing refugee crises. Climate change has the potential to intensify conflicts as people compete more for scarce resources. The humanitarian pillar is considered from the environmental and human-induced factors, how they ultimately tie up to conflicts and threats to human security, freedom, and development. Disaster risk reduction and resilience building must be increasingly explored as antidotes. The core principles of the humanitarian pillar includes humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. There are webs of interlinkages between humanitarian issues and the other pillars of this study. Also, the interconnection of armed violence and insecurities, pandemics, drought, flood, famine, and food insecurity and unemployment triggers challenges of peace, security, development, human rights, and humanitarian crisis. The 1991 UN General Assembly Resolution 46-182 holds that the victims of natural disasters and man-made disasters are key targets of humanitarian assistance. The resolution further underscores the relationships between emergency, rehabilitation, and development, as well as the links between economic growth, sustainable development, and prevention and preparedness against emergencies. Please see the resolution. Now, with respect to the analytical framework, this arrangement is a diagram applied to the purpose of this course, which I adapted from my submission to the ECA in evaluating the quadruple nexus in West and Central Africa. It's important to look at the fact of the pillars that we have mentioned, as you can see: development, peace and security, human rights, and humanitarian, as the four pillars that are interlinked together by the inner circle. And the goal of their interlinkages is to work towards the SDGs. But it's important for me to also point out quickly that you cannot make any progress with these pillars without looking at the situational foundation in which these pillars are being operationalized. In that case, it's important to look at the governance of the country that you are trying to work towards improving. And with respect to that governance, for much of Africa, the problem of bad leadership deficit, as I would call it, becomes crucial. Also, from my knowledge, I have also identified corruption as being crucial under governance. There are a number of other things under governance, but without looking at these two and thinking that the pillars themselves will result in progress would be a fallacy. Then we're talking about institutions. In the larger narrative, I dealt in some details in clarifying the fact that institutions are essential in keeping society running and in getting things done. So also resources, whether in terms of human resources or material resources. If a country lacks resources, it becomes difficult to achieve the end goals of the situational quadruple nexus. But having resources is not enough, because you may have all the resources necessary and you still don't get anywhere. Many countries without resources have been doing well for themselves at the international level. And that takes me to external dynamics. External dynamics is something that I want every participant to pay particular attention to, because we have been oriented towards not looking at the external environment within which we are trying to operate as countries before aid givers or aid agencies now try to look at the pillars and say the pillars are not working. When you look at external dynamics, many issues are involved, and some of that is elaborated in the word addition to this training. And during the course of the training, I will be too happy for you to look at examples of the problems of external dynamics on the developmental efforts in your own countries. Now, situational, I've spoken to the situational quadruple nexus, and which takes us to the second diagram. The import of the second diagram is to say that if we get everything right, we will be working towards a situation of utmost freedom. And it specifies a little bit more on governance by showing the problem of leadership deficit and corruption. I have explained reasonably on this situational foundation issues. They are overarching and makes the environment either supportive or very negative for the success of the interlinkages approach. The pillar interlinkages do not stand or exist alone. They don't implement themselves. During the process of implementation, you have to deal with a number of issues. Governance has been recognized severally as the most critical foundation issues affecting interlinkages. Findings from the ECA studies on the interlinkages in the West and Central subregions, as well as OSA training manual, demonstrate from desk reviews of literatures and surveys that governance plays a very key role, first in the realities of each of the pillars and the exploration of an interlinkage approach. Governance is simply the exercise of political, economic, and administrative authority to manage a country's affairs. Good governance has often been brought up in debates surrounding sustainable development. The AUC, through its African governance architecture as well as the APRM arrangement, have emphasized the importance of governance. OSA's work as part of the UN's partnership with the AU on the peace, security, development relationship underscores the interconnections between peace, security, development, governance, and human rights as crucial for the achievement of inclusive and sustainable development in Africa. Governance performance and delivery is measured by indices as the fragile or failed state index rankings, the corruption perception index, the global terrorism index, and the Mo Ibrahim index. The African peer review mechanism allows countries to voluntarily undergo a process of self-assessment on four main pillar issues: democracy and political governance, economic governance and management, corporate governance, and socioeconomic development. The role of political parties in governance must be emphasized. After all, parties serve as the basis for leadership recruitment. Corruption, mismanagement, and lack of accountability constitute major issues in governance. Corruption has been a major threat to progress on the four pillars. Corruption impedes economic, social, and environmental developments. Reinke and Smith portrayed a negative relationship between corruption and economic development by asserting that rising corruption rates severely dampens national incomes in economies. Corruption in a nation adversely impacts the SDGs of the country. For example, when resources are diverted from development programs for the selfish benefit of a few, the development aspirations of the people are impacted. It also leads to disenfranchisement, human rights abuses, and conflict situations with grave consequences for peace and security, humanitarianism, whilst fueling the vicious cycle of underdevelopment. Resources. The combination of both human and material resources are very critical for the interlinkages. Issues affecting material resources, such as developmental funding, higher demand exceeding scope of investment, poor capacity in governance, and corruption are very consequential. Resources are very critical. Some SDGs are purely resources dependent. SDGs 1, 2, and 5, for example. The extensive use of resources in production processes and consumption patterns is a very decisive aspect within the interaction of economic, social, climatic, and environmental changes, very critical for the interlinkages. The effect of internal availability, unavailability of marketable material resources as affecting policy choices. Internal availability / unavailability of human resources as affecting policy choices. Internal and external financing possibilities, connecting these resource issues with other relevant policy areas as economic, financial, fiscal, or industrial policy, with more intensity on the resources issue within SDG implementation process will promote social good and sustainable development. We cannot consider the situational foundation issues without considering the place of external influences in the form of colonial vestiges and the criminal and terrorist networks with strong external bonds. Other international influence comes from the European Union, the United States, and China. These relationships must be factored into calculations with respect to strategic and operational plans best out of a four-pillar interlinkages synergistic approach to support delivery. Institutions. National level implementation of the interlinkages of the four pillars of development, peace and security, human rights, and humanitarianism depends a lot on the level of commitment at the level of government and its institutions. The institutional capacities and how appropriate and functional these institutional arrangements are is very critical. Primary functions attributed to institutions are the facilitation of collective action and the reduction of transaction costs. The mere establishment of institutions is not enough. The public perceptions about their credibility also matters a lot. Capacity building for leadership development and efficiency is one very critical role of institutions. we shall examine these institutions, public institutions, civil society organizations, religious institutions, and the private sectors, and how they can support progress in the work for the interlinkages. The quizzes and assessments will be shared with you. Thanks. On any questions, you can reach myself and Dr. Gohu, as well as Ms. Dan Ensaya. Thank you very much.